As concerns, as we just talked about, grow whether or not the conflict will spread into a wider regional war, can the U.S. avoid additional involvement? Can they avoid adding more boots on the ground? Joining us now, David Tafuri, former State Department official and Obama campaign foreign policy advisor. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Am I wrong in saying it feels as if we're on a precipice, that this weekend there was a change in tone, a change in tactics, and really a whole change in what we're seeing, which could lead to a wider conflict?
I think it feels like that, and we're right to have a lot of anxiety about what's happening with more IDF troops going into Gaza. But I don't think a wider conflict is inevitable, and it ultimately is up to those stakeholders who are most likely to inflame more tensions, and principally that's Iran. And the way Iran will likely do it, if they choose to do it, is through their proxy forces. And they have proxy forces in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon and in Yemen, principally, and other places as well. But those are the principal places. And you've seen, you showed a map, and those proxy forces have done some attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and in Syria. But these are not completely out of character with what Iran and Iranian-backed forces were doing before the Hamas attack. What would really cause a potential for a substantial escalation is if Hezbollah opened a new front in Israel, in northern Israel, and if they tried to move into Israel and stepped up their attacks, or if there was a much more significant attack on U.S. forces in Iraq and in Syria, for instance. I don't think Iran wants to do that because they know that the response by the U.S. will be overwhelming, and we do have 2 aircraft carriers going into the region. We have the capability to do airstrikes on Iran, to do airstrikes on Hezbollah, and so that's the consequences that Iran faces. So that's why I don't think it's inevitable. Well,
and we've talked a lot about Hezbollah, and certainly, obviously, they're not being silent, but they're not being, I guess one could argue, not being overly aggressive. But that still could change. We saw images of flags over the weekend. Is there talks of a reoccupation? That would be the red line for Iran. Am I right or no?
Well, that's what Iran says. They say it's a red line, but are they ready to enforce that red line? Because Iran has a lot to lose if the U.S. does airstrikes on Iran. There's no way that Iran could withstand U.S. airstrikes, and whatever retaliation it did against the U.S. would be unlikely to be, substantial enough to outweigh the damage that we could inflict on Iran. But underneath all of this, the thing that I worry about most really is the possibility that Iran could get nuclear weapons, because they're getting closer to having nuclear weapons, and we cannot allow Iran to have nuclear weapons. We cannot allow the proliferation of nuclear weapons to Iran, because Iran will then really have the capacity to hold the rest of the world hostage, and Iran could export nuclear capabilities to other countries, other rogue states. So we have to really worry about that, and Iran knows that as well.
Well, yeah, and I think what first came to my mind was when you said that, they can't afford it, they have so much to lose, and then you sort of spiral, right? Because, who's backing them and who can support them? So you could certainly go down a very long rabbit hole, and it's quite disturbing. David Tafuri, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your expertise. Speaking of...
Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.